Hi, this is Marilyn Morningstar, and I am with you today to tell you a little bit about Rena. Rena is one of the two main key characters. There's Rena and Rolf, and Rena is quite a tenacious little teenager when we open the story. And I'll just read you chapter 1 to start with, and then I might give you a little other clues. I might not. I'm not sure about that. We'll see what happens. Anyway, okay, so the first part of the book is called Warsaw Tailspin. It's chapter 1, and the name of the chapter is Wedding Vows and Black Dragons. Warsaw, Poland, 1939. Against the backdrop of the Vistula River, with its turbulent spume, the bride and groom exuded contentment as they faced the rabbi and exchanged wedding vows. 16-year-old Rena Steiner tried to feel the excitement radiating from the bride in waves of joy and solemnity, but her mind refused to cooperate. A book slid off her lap and hit the floor with a thump. She stared down at the gold print against the burgundy cover. Charles Dickens. Like an assembly of wide-eyed owls, all shifting simultaneously, the congregation pivoted in their seats and inspected her. She buried her hands in the folds of her dress, hoping no one would notice how much she trembled. Could she really go through with it? She had enough money, but tomorrow just seemed too soon. With a golden thread of kindness, Sarah it's her best friend, by the way, tried to ease the situation and whispered in her ear, "Do you see that eerie darkness outside?" The flush on Rena's cheeks intensified her embarrassment from dropping the book. Pestilence and wrath, she thought. She whispered back, "A storm must be coming." "But it was sunny a minute ago," Sarah said. Rena's stomach tightened, as it sometimes did at the slightest notion of foreboding. Dreary skies often forced her mind back to the dismal part of her history, a chapter she vowed to expunge. Her legs started a nervous quiver. She needed to share her secret with Sarah. Locking her fingers around her blue silk handbag, her arms went rigid. Yesterday, as Rena walked home from the hospital after a long day of changing dressings for wounded soldiers, wringing out bloody sheets, and listening to rumors of war, she made a decision that would prove her mind sound and her heart genuine. It would cost her everything and everyone she loved, but her resolution was rock solid. After stopping to cash in all her coins, she went home and tied up her 2-foot stack of poetry notes, packed them into a 5-gallon milk can, and buried it with her diaries behind the barn. Someday, when this was all over, she would finish her verse. For Rena, sitting still and quiet was akin to torture. She forced her attention to details like the bride's long tapered nails and the silver filament in her gold wedding band. The groom wore a white satin robe and black hat, and the bride was adorned in a white silk wedding dress with a facial veil of silk and lavender metallic fringe. Studying the groom, whose voice splintered with each word, Rena asked Sarah, "Do you think he has the makings of a good father?" Sarah, "They say he's very pious, studies the Talmud 2 hours a day." Rena wondered if he would get down on his knees, roar like a lion, and let his children ride on his back through the jungles of Africa, as her own father had done when they lived in Berlin. Closing her eyes, she submitted her requisition to the grandest of all matchmakers. If her future husband could have her father's humor and her brother's wit, he could easily win her heart. At the sound of broken glass, Rena jumped, unnerved by the traditional breaking of the wine goblet and the sudden burst of cheers. Sarah said, "Soon a matchmaker will knock on your door, and hopefully mine. Just think of it. Wedding plans." "I am, but I can't. We need to talk. If only the Lord of Hosts would fix her, would make her truly Jewish like everyone else." She sighed, her fingers fidgeting uncontrollably, her mind jumping from ugly scars to nameless parents, to uncertainties about her future. She hated that. She hated them. She hated him most. "Just look at them, Rena. The bride and groom look like a prince and princess," Sarah said. The timing was wrong. Divulging the bad news now would just blemish Sarah's memory of this joyous occasion. She thought, even though it is the worst of times, marvel and yearning still prick young, innocent hearts like ours. She felt like giggling and weeping at the same time. The fragrance of fresh gardenias affixed with lavender ribbons to the canopy over the wedding couple's heads scented the entire hall, giving Sarah's allergies a fit. Rena inhaled and exhaled in long, deep breaths, the sweet scent calming her nerves. As she and Sarah stepped away to a table laden with cakes, Rena brushed her long brown blonde curls away from her shoulders. She usually wore her hair in a ponytail to keep it off the sides of her face, the curly hairs around her ears so bothersome. The cinnamon rolls smelled heavenly, and Rena decided on apple strudel as Sarah blotted her nose. Munching on delectable pastries, they leaned against a wall, shoulder to shoulder, to watch the celebrants dance. As the tangy taste of apples and currants delighted her taste buds, Rena's mind soared with the same gnawing question. How could she leave? How could she abandon her best friend? How could she go off alone to a foreign country? As the pianist played a delicate Chopin waltz, the flock of guests offered congratulations and hearty embraces to the newlyweds and their families. A few minutes later, the music stopped and the wedding guest moved toward a man standing on a chair near the giddy-faced bridegroom. When he began to make his speech, Rena heard a loud sound like a distant explosion. Along with several others, she rushed outside to the street-side balcony to see what caused the noise. As far as she could see, there were no cars on the road, only a steam-driven train in the distance. As a survivor of an assault at age 10, she often had to fight the familiar apprehension that reared its ugly head at loud noises or men's rowdy voices. She heard her mother mention how moody she'd become since her period of convalescence. But what was the use of experiences of overcoming death if encounters with the devil didn't alter the consciousness? Sarah joined Rena outside as she stood talking with two bearded men. Rena watched how warmly Sarah smiled at them. She always had a special glow about her. Sarah asked, "What was the bang?" Rena explained with her hands, raising them both in bewilderment. "Don't know. The men say it's nothing to worry about. Maybe a car backfiring." The secret kept crisscrossing Rena's mind, reminding her how much she stood to lose. As they meandered along the porch, the time came to confess, but she didn't know where to begin. "I've dreamed so many times about our plans for a double wedding." Sarah said, "Me too, Rena. I still like white, pale yellow. and light blue for our colors. But how about a pretty pastel shade of aqua? Sort of like the ocean color, like your eyes. Rena chuckled at the description of her eyes. Sarah had a way to make plain things seem exceptional. She said, "At least a wedding dress is enough to cover the grotesque scars on my leg." Sarah, with your looks, I wouldn't give that a worry a second thought. But what about the wedding night? No man will want to touch me. It's what's inside that truly counts, and you are the most beautiful soul I know, Sarah said to her best friend. Rena's reaction to Sarah's observation started at her toes and kindled every pore of her skin. As usual, you are the sweetest, and you are sweeter than anyone I know. You should be a poet. Maybe you could compose me a new life and help me put this world back together again. Sarah, let's not talk about sad things. Don't you know it's your natural resilience to our unfortunate circumstances that I depend on for my optimism? Listen to your father. It's not for girls like us to worry about politics and governments and history. We have weddings and families and children to look after. And where's your light-hearted nature today, Rena? With a little chuckle and a wide grin, Rena put her arm around Sarah and conveyed accord. Tomorrow everything would change anyway. She would no longer spend hours fretting over her impossible aspirations to promote tolerance and end man's cruelty to one another. Instead, she would sweat over every minute just to survive. She says, "Do you like the idea of releasing white doves at the end of our wedding ceremony?" Sarah, I miss the times when our wedding plans were all we talked about. Sarah tucked her straw-colored hair behind her ears and smiled up at Rena. But it wasn't her real smile. Something was off. Now that Rena examined her closely, she looked sallow, and the natural crispness to her voice sounded rather cloudy. "Is anything bothering you? You seem uneasy." It took Sarah a few seconds to respond, her chin quivering. "We received a letter from Papa. I'll tell you about it later. I don't want to spoil this happy occasion." Sarah's father had been sent to a work camp with 10,000 other Jews right after the night of broken glass in Berlin. Along with other unpleasant reminders of awful things, Rena did her best to barricade the memory of that night at the periphery of her conscious mind. Whatever Sarah's news, Rena knew it could not be good. She'd planned this moment since yesterday, but she couldn't reveal her upsetting plans just now. It was her turn to soothe Sarah's nerves, not vice versa. "Sarah, I think everything will work out, but..." "What?" After 6 sneezes in a row, Sarah stopped further probing by saying, "Let's walk around the building to the river. I have a couple of muffins in my pockets. Do you want to feed the birds?" Rena nodded and caught a glimpse of the red threads in the whites of Sarah's sapphire eyes. A pocket of sunbeams broke through the ominous sky, permeating her essence with a sense of gratitude. Rena asked her, "Isn't it a blessing?" "What?" "We have each other." "Oh, yes, a very great blessing. You are the only person in the whole world who doesn't make me feel self-conscious about my short, chubby body." A tear formed in Sarah's eye, and Rena knew she worried about more than her figure. Rumors about Nazis approaching Warsaw made everyone nervous as a trapped cat. Rena's vocal cords constricted, the consequences of her decisions so tender. No matter how bad it hurt. She had to rise above her selfishness for the benefit of her family. She said, "I don't know what I'll do without you, Sarah." "Sarah, without me? What do you mean?" Rena shrugged, her tongue delayed by emotion. Finally, she sighed. "I've got wings in my belly." Then tears dotted her cheeks. Sarah wiped them away, but Rena saw that she wept too. Perhaps no explanation was needed. Sarah often understood things before they were spoken. She had uncanny foresight. Rena put out her index finger. Sarah locked her finger with Rena's, and they both smiled and said in unison, "Best friends forever." For a long time they stood in silence on the porch overlooking the river, the sound of rushing water a tonic to Rena's soul. The fresh breeze seemed to calm Sarah's sniffles. Life bloomed everywhere. Saffron sunflowers blanketed the distant fields visited by flocks of swallows and skylarks. Along the opposite shore, voices distracted her. Couples strolling arm in arm reminded her how long she had wished to have a boyfriend of her own, ever since the age of 12, when her family still lived in Berlin. She had daydreamed about the day she would be introduced to her future husband. As if infatuated by the fantasy, she habitually wrote down little details about her wedding preparations in her diary. Rena said, "Remember Berlin? Remember when we both believed in fairies and unicorns? Our old homes? I'll never forget those days, our elegant 3-story manor right near the synagogue on Oranikerberger Straub. Life was a series of sweet imaginings then." She took in a deep breath and slowly let it out. "Maybe it's only the ease of liberty in Warsaw, but I love heavenly fragrance here of the morning dew. I can even smell it in the city, especially in our flower garden." "I love this place too," Rena agreed. "Living with Uncle Mosh and Aunt Mitha on their farm has been delightful. I'll always remember how much fun you and I had with the animals, climbing trees, fishing, feeding birds, and riding horses. Remember how we used to run our hands through the golden grain in the barn, pretending it was gold?" Sarah chuckled, and Rena knew she'd forgotten her troubles, if only for a few minutes. She decided to hold off the bad news a little longer, with quiet appreciation for her mutual love for one another. They made their way down the porch stairs to the grass. From the vantage point at the river, they looked out over the valley of farmhouses, her uncle's just past the next bridge. Sorry about that. She didn't let Sarah see the emotion varnishing her eyes. How very lovely. Oh, how she adored everything about the countryside. From one end of the sky to the other, the colors of the sunset painted them a snapshot of this unforgettable moment together. Prismatic tints of yellow, orange, and pink blended with the blue and aqua of the vanishing sky. "I think this must be the most beautiful place in the entire world." Sarah took Rena's hand and filled it with muffin crumbs for the birds and said, "God has such remarkable talent for painting the sky." Rena's heart felt like pulp as dark clouds closed off the heavenly production. She may never see all this again. She may never see her best friend again. Her letters of explanation were written. Tomorrow she would be on that train. And then she said, I wish all of life could be as happy and beautiful as right now. But there won't be a double wedding, Sarah. I must leave Warsaw. Leave Warsaw? Leave Warsaw? I'm sorry, but my parents are waiting on their travel documents because I never had a birth certificate. The authorities keep asking for more money and saying they can't get it disregarded, but it's been months. After I leave, my family can get their permits and get out of Poland back to safety in Israel. You can't just leave everyone, Rena. People depend on you. You're barely 16. You're the only friend I have. The faint chatter of the aircraft in the distance shot a volt of current through Rena's bones, but she employed her mental stop sign. While Sarah objected to her plans, Rena scrutinized the distant sky. Just as 3 red robins circled them, and Rena's heart began to settle down, she heard it again, a crack, a sizzle like fireworks. She cranked her head in every direction before she discovered the likely source. Mercy! Her jaw dropped as she squinted. Far off in the distance, she spotted a string of airplanes, like black buzzards against the creamy pink clouds. Sarah said, "That looks like a lot of airplanes. They must be getting ready to fight off the Nazis. I hope the rumors..." Rena, "It's time to bring the dead out of their graves," Rena snapped. Strange sensations like erupting lava inside her cells suddenly consumed her. She slid her hand down to her thigh, to her knee, and found it safely hidden under her dress. She carried the dagger everywhere she went since the day she found it in the attic. When she wore dresses, she threaded a garter through the black leather case and wore it just above her knee. With pants and a shirt, she strapped it to her belly with a narrow belt. No one knew she carried a dagger, not even Sarah. She told herself she carried it around for protection, but deep down in her gut, she knew it could also be used to achieve revenge. As her eyes dropped to the horizon, she stopped and gripped Sarah's arm. "Look, it's Jonathan! He's running down the hill towards us." With wide eyes, her mouth agape, Sarah turned to Rena with renewed force. "Did you see that? Your brother just launched himself over that boulder." Rena squinted and concentrated on the determined way his legs carried him. The way his thick brown hair, always smartly combed, now looked disheveled. Her knees buckled. "He's upset." Rena turned to stone and... Sarah turned to stone. Rena covered her mouth to contain her urge to explode. "Oh, my, look at everyone running behind him. Rena. "Papa? My mother? Aunt Mitha? Uncle Mosh? Little Judith?" Rena felt pressure growing under her ribs. The hands on her watch seemed to be moving too fast. She sucked in a deep breath, gripped her gown, and hurried uphill toward them. "What?" she yelled out, feeling chilled and frazzled. "The Nazis are coming!" Jonathan hollered. He bounded toward them, out of breath, but full of his usual energy. His brown eyes, hooded under bushy eyebrows, bulged from their sockets bigger than plums. "A group of men came and warned us. The German armies are headed toward Warsaw. They need help to dig trenches and build barricades." Looking skyward, Sarah told Rena, "That letter from my papa? Rumor has it the Nazis may be sending him here to Warsaw to work in a cement factory." "A German factory in Warsaw?" Including Jonathan in her gaze, Sarah told them, My father said the Nazis will control Poland soon. So factories. For Jewish labor, no doubt, Jonathan added with a growl. He also said, we should get out of Poland as soon as possible. And her other family members grew closer. As they grew closer, yelling about the trouble, they all stopped and looked up as muffled thumps, odd grumblings like blasts of thunder came closer. Rena's mouth fell open as the noise got louder and more solid. She felt her brain breaking, exploding, her temper bursting. If evil intended to reduce her to dust, he would need to come up with something more exceptional than brute force, fire, and fear. Suddenly, the clatter was just over them, over the clouds. The shriek of the whistling noise close by sent everyone to the ground, face down, hands covering their heads. Everyone except Rena. She grabbed a handful of black stones, the ones she normally used for juggling or throwing across the face of the water. Stuka dive bombers, Jonathan yelled. Watch out! Rena struggled to regain her footing on the embankment, but tripped and fell flat on her face. Rising up again, the palms of her hands scuffed. She spit dirt off her tongue. As one dive bomber cruised low over the river, she threw a stone with all her might. Rotten death dogs! I will not be burned alive. Missing the target, she grabbed another handful of stones against the complaints of her brother. Dust and the stench of engine waste stuck to her nostrils. With the capacity of a megaphone, she screamed at them, Monsters, go back to hell! After her brother yanked her to the ground, she felt a concoction of terror and hatred percolating inside her head. She saw the face of death contorted with laughter as he watched her melting. Her pulse pounded in her neck. Sweat dripped down the sides of her face. She reached for her mental stop sign, but it faded into a splatter of blood as a paralyzing scene flashed in her head. A bloody episode of naked Nazis and gray skeletons floating in water, her exposed body among them. She shook her head and back and forth and to rid herself of the image. Was it her mind replaying some twisted version of that terrifying night in Berlin, or was it a premonition of something to come? It only lasted a second, but it made her heart bang against her chest like a machine gun. She knew one thing. If she stayed in Warsaw among the Nazis, someday their venom would burst her open and she might really lose her mind. The thought petrified her. As the black dragons with long fuselages and red and black swastikas swooped down toward them, their black smoke leaving a long, billowing tail, she squeezed the rocks in her hand until blood seeped between her fingers. So there is chapter 1 for you. This is not necessarily a thriller, but it does have a lot of hooks, according to my readers, that sort of are never ending. And the only commonality comment that I've had is when they get to about chapter 35 or so, they're really worried that all those hooks won't be wrapped up in the last part of this book. And in fact, just to let you know, readers, that it will be wrapped up and it'll be a very satisfying read and logical conclusion. So then when you go to book 2, you can find out more. No spoilers here. And then book 3, which is going to be called Neon Gods, as well as 3, 4, and 5. And that then takes place in Las Vegas, completely different history. Also covers the Vietnam War and the President Kennedy's assassination. So I think it's an interesting story. It did take me most of my life to put it together, and then I had to divide it up for the wishes of Doubleday into 5 books, and I kind of gave up for a while, and now I'm back. So I expect to finish those stories and get them out as soon as possible. I hope readers will share this book, because the only way the word can get out and make it worth, while, not for me, because what's important to me is that people understand the story and understand why we need to have more compassion, empathy, and acceptance and inclusiveness in our societies, so that we can better mankind and better the lives of the future inhabitants of the earth. So that's why I want it shared. So if you agree with me on those issues, I'd really appreciate it if you share it. Okay, so, well, thank you very much again for watching, and I'm not sure how many chapters I will read and post, but anyway, I know it's kind of an uncommon thing for authors to read full chapters, but hey, I'm kind of an uncommon type of person. I don't know. We're all uncommon, right? Alrighty then. Talk to you later. Thank you.